Linda wanted me to use the last 5 or 10 minutes for questions, interpretive dance.
Gary, what inspired you to become a writer?
Fear of poverty. No,
No, I sense you've had that in your brain and practice for many years.
well, a lot of people say that, I'd like to write, but I don't know how to tell a story. And we tell ourselves stories in our heads every day. I mean, we have encounters with people where they say something that really offends us or makes us angry, and you just, nod your head or smile and walk away. And as you're walking away, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. You're already writing a story in your head. And I just got tired of rewriting history in my head and decided to start putting it down on paper, because that's kind of, to me, that's what fiction does. Fiction takes reality, says this is unacceptable, and reshapes it into something more acceptable. So that's that, and watching a lot of really bad science fiction movies when I was a kid. Really bad ones.
Question. I'm either your friend or your stalker. I know you grew up in Newark. Was there any particular incident or something that really inspired you to place your town in an alternate reality in Newark?
When I wrote my first novel that I wrote, which has never seen publication and God willing never will, I foolishly set in Texas and Mexico, where I had never been. So all of the geography and the landscape and the customs and all of that is stuff that I got out of books. And it reads so inauthentic to me. I used to study acting, and one of the things that I had to endure while I worked professionally as an actor for about 5 years, and spent a lot of time around God's gift of theater, otherwise known as the method actor. And what method acting is about, when it's applied well, is to be able to call on sense memory from your past experience and filter it through the sensibilities of the character whom you are playing at that time. I found it absolutely useless as an acting tool, but as a writing tool, it's invaluable. And I've wandered off the highway. Your question was there an event in?
Yeah, was there any particular event or anything that made you want to place, especially the horror fiction and the horror genre in Newark?
Well, it's falling back on that old rule. People hear this so many times, they go, oh yeah, but it was either Faulkner or Hemingway who said, write what you know. And what I knew was being mid to lower middle class in a very hardcore blue-collar town. And what all that entailed for the people who worked in the factories and their kids who went to school or in a lot of cases dropped out of school. What these kids did to occupy their minds and their time that didn't involve getting drunk or smoking pot or snorting something. And I took a look all around me and thought, this isn't the place that I remember when I was growing up, but at the same time, it is the place I remember. Are you all familiar with the term palimpsest? They use it sometimes, it's a term that's used sometimes in physics, but basically when monks were transcribing these ancient texts back in the 14th and 15th centuries, they didn't have a lot of paper. So one of the things they would have to do is they would have to erase the drawings and the ink that were on a particular page and write and paint over it. But as that began to dry, the impression of what was on the page before bled through a little bit, so that at one point you're looking at both the new page and the ghost of the page that was there before it. And it's kind of that way when you look at a place where you used to live. You see it as it is now, which may not be the prettiest place in the world, but at the same time, the place you remember is still there underneath the surface. And what I've been trying to do since I started writing about what I know, is to reconcile those two things, both in my mind and as a believable place in fiction. Does that answer your question? Okay. You had one? No. Anyone else?
You said you're ending this series. Do you have another one planning or
Yeah.
works?
Yeah.
Will you give us a sneak peek a little bit about it?
The next one, it's one I've been working on now for about 6 months, concerns a guy who runs like a nostalgia shop where you buy posters and movies and movie paraphernalia and all that, whose mother and grandmother used to both be actresses in live television. And his grandmother, as it turns out, was murdered on camera during a live broadcast of something like Studio 54, Playhouse 90 or Studio 1. And he finds out about this because the ghost of Buster Keaton comes and tells him about it, because Keaton has found out something about what happened with Fatty Arbuckle, and he needs this guy to help him clear Fatty Arbuckle's name, and as a result, he will help him find out who killed his grandmother. And it's actually meant to be funny, even though it deals a lot with McCarthyism and a bunch of other things that were going on during the time of live television in the 50s. So it's more of the same, but not quite as grim. It's a little more whimsical, which is a word I never thought I'd apply to myself. So.
What brought you to those stories of horror?
When I was a kid, my dad didn't get off work at night until about 11:45. He worked 12-hour shifts. He'd go in at like 10:30 in the morning and get home about 11:30 at night. And Friday night was the only night I was allowed to stay up. And Friday night, if you remember, Fritz the Night Owl used to have Chiller Theater. And I would sit up, and Dad would come home, and Mom would bring in a couple of TV dinners. We'd sit there and we'd watch these horrible horror movies that Fritz would show. And I'm like 6 or 7 years old, and some awful piece like The Killer Shrews, which if you see it, I saw it recently again, a few months ago, and I just laughed my head off. Scared me to death when I was a kid. It was because of The Incredible Shrinking Man and the ending of the original The Fly with Vincent Price that I am terrified of spiders. I figured that out a few years ago, because someone was going, "Why are you so scared of spiders?" I said, "I don't know." I'm laying in bed one night and I look up and there's this spider dangling. And I remembered that shot from The Fly. Remember that very last one when he's in the web going, "Help me, help me." And they get that close-up of that big-ass ugly spider. And it looks like it's about this close. And I remember that's where I got my fear of spiders. And I thought, well, if something that, that's made up could scare me that much, that stays with me, 40 odd years later, there's got to be something to this. And I wonder if you could tell stories that are, intended to entertain and scare, but also maybe, like the old fairy tales, can offer some sort of a moral point, like some of the old Twilight Zones used to do. Chiller Theater and Twilight Zone were probably the two things that made me decide I wanted to try my hand at this. So, well, thank you, and thank all of you for coming.